This video is going to be demonstrating how I use Griptape in combination with other tools during my workflow as a professional compositor. For anyone that's not aware, a quick Google search reveals that Griptape is an enterprise-grade AI orchestration platform acquired by Foundry in February 2026 to accelerate AI integration in VFX and animation pipelines. Essentially, it has lots of the key tools like you might have heard of already, like Nano, Banana, Flux, Qwen, and it's a platform that allows you to harness them all with a node-based workflow. Quick tour of the interface, although it's actually pretty simple. This main space is your node graph, essentially similar to Nuke. Along the left-hand side, we have all of the tools within Griptape. So for example, under Image, we have all of the things like Nano, Banana, and Flux in here. Along the top, there's the fairly universal menus in all software. These buttons along the top are for actually kicking off the workflows. So once you've got a few nodes set up and plugged into each other, by pressing Run Workflow, that will actually set off the process. You can do the whole thing, you can run it to a selected point, run it from a selected point, or also cancel the run if you get halfway through and realise it's not going to work, or just want to stop it. And that's pretty much all you need to know. It's a very simple interface, which is nice. So now let's hop into Nuke and take a look at the first shot that we're going to be working on. There's a total of 3 shots that I'm going to be showing in this video, and they're going to ramp up in complexity as we go. The first one's going to be super simple. I'm just going to be removing some of the cars and the pedestrians in this shot using some of the tools in Griptape. Doesn't really matter what frame, let's just pick a random one. In this case, frame 1027. Go into my file path. I'm going to name it the same thing, which is GRP shot 1 L1 version 1. Just keeping the good naming conventions. And then it's not an image sequence, so I'm just going to change it to .jpeg. My output color space is going to be output rec 709. I'm working in ACES, but if you're working in Nuke's default, just set it to rec 709. It's the same color space. And then we'll work in rec 709 throughout the entire process. Normally you'd want to work in something larger like ACES CG, but a limitation of generative tools currently is they can only work with 8-bit images, whereas my lovely 16-bit EXR that I have here has a lot more dynamic range, so I can pull the exposure around and not lose all the highlights in the sky. But tools like Nano, Banana can't currently use EXRs. There's some ways around this, which I'll talk about towards the end in the final shot. But for now, we're just going to work in Rec 709 on JPEGs and then bring it back in. So I'm going to go into my write node and render one frame, and then we're going to hop into Griptape. In the workflow here, I can just drag and drop my image straight in. So I'm going to locate it and drag this into the workflow. And now once it's loaded in, you can see we have a preview of our image here. We can look at it in full screen. Got some image details, which is the metadata. We can see that it's 2160 by 3840, which is 4K. Also worth noting, it's in portrait rather than landscape or vertical. So the aspect ratio is 9 by 16, which will be important in a second. So to kick this off, I'm going to go over to the tools on the left-hand side, and I'm going to bring in a Nano Banana image generation node. Each of these different tools that I was talking about earlier have different strengths and weaknesses, so it's worth doing a little bit of research into which ones are good for different applications. To the best of my knowledge, Nano Banana is currently one of the leading tools in terms of photorealism, so when it comes to manipulating images, that's the one that I'm going to be using. So let's drag it into our workflow here, and then it works just like any other node-based software really, so you plug the output of this one into the input of here. It's nicely color-coded, so we can see that the image output is red here, and it goes into the add item to input images on the Google Nano Banana node. Once that's plugged in, our preview now appears within inside the Nano Banana node as well. There's not loads of settings in the node, it's pretty straightforward. You've got the model at the top. Then we have our prompt, which is where you actually tell Nano Banana what to do with your image. Then underneath our preview, there's 2 quite important settings. The first one is our aspect ratio. It defaults to 16 by 9, which in most cases is probably what you will be using. In this case, because I shot it vertically, I actually want to set this to 9 by 16. And then for image size, it's currently on 1K. As my source resolution is actually 4K, I might as well set it to the max res, which is 4K. Most of the time, if you're filming at HD, 2K will be absolutely fine. For now, let's leave it on 4K. The output file at the bottom is what our file is going to be called, and also where it's saved on our hard drive. You can click the folder icon here to specify where you want it to go. I'm just going to change the name to be GRP shot 1 clean plate underscore version 1, if I can type. There we go. And also you want to make sure you put the file type on the end, so I'm just going to do a JPEG, and now it will come out as the correct format. Okay, so that's all set up, and now we actually want to type in a prompt to tell Nano Banana what to do with our image. So in this case, I'm going to be removing the cars and also the runners that you can see here. So for my prompt, very simply, I'm just going to type in remove people and cars, don't change anything else. And I'll show why I've put this bit on the end shortly. And now we can set off our workflow. It's a very simple setup, as you can see. But this is all we need, so I'm going to go up to the top and press Run Workflow. Generally for 4K images, I found it takes about 30-40 seconds. Doesn't take very long. You can come down to the logs here at the bottom and see what it's doing in real time if you're interested. And there we go, it's finished. I can click on the preview here to have a look at it, and as you can see, there are no longer people or cars in the shot, which is very impressive. At first glance, I'd say it looks perfect. Let's bring it into Nuke and have a closer look. You will notice if I hover over the image here, it's actually come out at 3072 by 5504 pixels, which is bigger than my original source image. There's not a huge amount of control over the output resolution. Like I said, you just have the image size going between 1, 2 and 4K. There is a separate resize node for scaling images, which I'll demonstrate on the more complicated shot at the end of the video. But higher resolution isn't a problem, and I'll just end up reformatting it down to be the same size as my source resolution in Nuke. Speaking of which, let's hop back into Nuke. I'm going to drag and drop my clean plate back into my node graph and just set it to be the correct color. And now if I flick between the two, you might notice immediately that the image is scaled up slightly. One quirk with generating AI images is that it's a bit of a dice roll each time. You don't really know what you're going to get, and if you run the same prompt twice, you'll still get a different result. But generally for what I actually need, which is just a clean plate, this is perfectly serviceable. So to actually use this, I'm going to reformat it down to be the same size as my source resolution, which is 4K, but 9:16. So you can see there my resolution's changing. And then to get the scale to be correct, I'm going to transform it and just do a difference map between my original plate and the one that Griptape generated. I can refine the difference in the scale until they're very similar. So now on to actually utilising the clean plate. Generally with VFX, it's best practice to alter your original source plate as little as possible. So in this instance, I wouldn't take a large chunk of the road and track it in. I would just use very small sections to cover up the people and the cars. So just to demonstrate, if I draw a quick mat around the woman running, and this car here, maybe the runner over here as well, then I can copy this alpha in and pre-mult it, maybe give it a little bit of a blur just to soften the edges, and then I can merge this over the top of my original plate. And that's essentially all there is to it. Now obviously this was a very simple example. The footage isn't moving very much, and I could even have just gone to a different point in the shot, like here, and then just frame held this as well, grabbed a section like this, and then I could put this on top. But this was just the first example, just to show how it works very simply. Now let's take a look at a more complicated cleanup shot, where it actually is very useful to use generative tools. So here's another shot that presents an interesting problem. If I wanted to remove the graffiti on this wall, and I was trying to do that with traditional techniques like clone painting, there's actually not very much of the original wall to use to clone back on top. And also, especially on the left-hand side, because of the perspective of the bricks, doing the clone painting in a way that maintains the straight lines and also the spacing between the bricks is really complicated, and I would say borderline a bit of an impossible task. It's going to start to look quite duplicated very quickly. Even just from doing that patch there, you can see that some of the distinctive textures of the wall, where the grouting and everything is a bit of a different colour, you start to recognise the repetition in the patterns where I've clone painted it. So in this case, this is where using generative tools would actually be very beneficial and probably save you a huge amount of time. So we're going to do the same thing that we did in the first one. I'm going to go to the first frame and write out a frame to work on. Again, I'm just going to give it the same name, but make it a JPEG. Output color space is Rec 709 and render one frame. Then back in Griptape, again, I'm going to locate the frame that I just output, drag it from my file browser into the workflow, and it shows up here. For this image, it's a 16:9 image, and I'm just working at 1920 by 1080, which is HD resolution. This is probably what most people will be working on a lot of the time. Then I'm going to come over to the tools on the left-hand side, and under the image menu, I'm going to grab the Nano Banana node again, drag this into my workflow, and then I'm going to connect up my input image again. In this case, my aspect ratio is 16:9, which is correct this time, and I'm going to set my image size to 2K, which is basically a little bit bigger than HD resolution. For my output file, I'm going to set this to be called grp shot2 underscore clean plate underscore version 1. And for the prompt on this, I'm going to say remove graffiti and orange barrier. Don't change anything else. Now again, the reason why I keep putting don't change anything else onto this is because AI is very, very good at doing what it's told. And the more information you give it, the better a job it generally does. To demonstrate this, if I show you some previous examples, this is one of the early tests I did when working out how to use Griptape for this video. This is the images I used on the previous shot. Don't worry about the color shift, I messed up the color space settings. You can see again, it's done a great job of removing the cars and the people, but it's also changed loads of other stuff in the image that I didn't ask it to do. It's added this text onto the road that wasn't there before, all the white lines have changed, it's changed some of the words back here to absolute gobbledygook. The yellow lines here are much thicker than they were previously. It's removed this thing on the floor. So while it's done what I asked it to do, it's also done a load of other stuff that was just completely irrelevant. And again, like I said, it's a dice roll, so whenever you generate an AI image, you don't quite know what you're going to get, and this is just part of what that process involves currently. So that's why when I was doing these prompts, I typed in don't change anything else, which will hopefully instruct Nano Banana to not do too much meddling with the other stuff in the shot. It doesn't always work, but I think it's worth trying. So just make your prompts as specific as you can, and in fact I might even say, and keep the bricks the same. I almost forgot to put a .jpeg on the end of my file type as well. Okay, so we're ready to give this a go. I'm going to hit run workflow at the top and we'll see what happens. Okay, and it's done. As you can see, our image has appeared here again. Let's have a look at what it's done. Interestingly, it's duplicated the vents lower down on the building, which I hadn't seen it do before when I was testing this video. I don't really want that. I'd rather it just left the wall as it was, but without the graffiti. So although that's pretty close, I'm actually going to run it again. I'm just going to do a new version. So let's call this version 2. And let's run the workflow again, and we'll see what the difference is. Okay, version 2 is done. Let's have a look. So yeah, as you can see, now the vents aren't there. So obviously, if you don't like the image you get out, you can tweak your prompt to try and steer it more in the correct direction. But if it's a very small detail that's just a bit off, sometimes running exactly the same prompt again will actually give you what you're after. It's a bit of a roulette wheel. It's just part of the process at the moment. I think it's quite funny. So anyway, that's saved out. So let's go back into Nuke and now utilize this clean plate. Okay, here it is. I'm going to drag this into my Nuke node graph, set my color space back to Rec 709. And if I compare the two, looks pretty good. Like I mentioned earlier, the resolution of this is slightly higher. It's 2752 by 1536. So I can just reformat this back down to HD. So it's now exactly the same resolution as my source plate. So now let's actually track this in and utilize the clean plate properly to remove the graffiti for the whole shot. I'm going to start by just doing a camera track. If you want to know more about camera tracking, I have a full video on this, so I'm not going to explain the process in this video. And then I'm going to create some geometry for the wall by selecting the points on the wall and creating a card. Then also in my camera tracker, I'm going to create a camera. Because of the different perspectives, I'm going to do these in two separate pieces. So first of all, let's create a mask for this first wall, roughly around the graffiti so that I'm not actually using more of the clean plate than I need to. Then I'm going to project this onto my 3D geometry using a project 3D node. I'm going to frame hold it on the first frame, plug in my camera, and then plug in my card geometry. Add a scanline render so we can see this, connect that up, and then merge this over the background footage. And if I turn that on and off, you can now see we have our projected clean plate on the wall. And also if I scrub through, it sticks to the wall because it's projected on the 3D geometry. Let's now do the same thing for the back wall. Just going to go on the camera tracker again, select some of these, create a card, and then draw a matte for the graffiti on the back wall as well. And then exactly the same thing, project 3D, plug it into my camera, let's grab the frame hold from here, and then plug in the card geometry again. Rather than using two scanline renders, I can just use a merged geo, which is a bit more effective for optimizing the script. Now, as you can see, we have a nice clean wall. Like I said earlier about not changing more of the source footage than we need to, it might be a good idea to mask out this door from the projection, just so we're not affecting it, as it doesn't actually have any graffiti on it. To do that, I'm just going to do a second mask and cut out this bit of the door that's not got graffiti on. And then merge this over the original matte and stencil it to cut it out, give it a little bit of a blur as well, and that will just isolate the projection so it doesn't cover up the door. And there we go, that's our clean plate tracked nicely into the rest of the shot. Obviously towards the end the foreground bars go over the top, so we need to roto those. I'll spare you the process of watching me actually do that in real time. I did a demo run of this off camera, so I've got some pre-prepared. So I've got these two mattes for the foreground bits of metal. You can see where I had the alpha blurred to replicate the depth of field. We're actually seeing the graffiti coming back through. There's a really simple solution for this. It's just doing a slight edge extension on the roto. In this case I'm going to use a color edge node. This just looks at the alpha, which is currently here, and then it gives you control to smear those color pixels within the alpha outside. So I can essentially increase the erode until it's stretching the grey of the metal bar far enough that when I pre-molt it, it gets rid of the graffiti. If you haven't got the color edge node, you can just use the edge extend node within Nuke. It does the same thing. If I make a bit more room down here, instead of merging my roto over the top of everything, I can just merge it over the top of my projection. And instead of using the over blending mode, I can set it to a top. This overlays the roto in the same way, but it doesn't do it outside of the alpha of my projection. And that way we don't get the edge extension anywhere except for where we want it. So now if I play this back, you can see the finished result is pretty seamless, and it's not bad at all for about 10 minutes of work. If I was doing this on a professional shot, I'd probably take a bit more time to denoise the generated image, and then apply the grain from the plate back on top afterwards, and even probably working with an undistorted plate for the projection if I had a lens grid. But that's the general concept, it works really well, and overall the way that Nano Banana's filled in the texture of the bricks is much better than anything I could probably have done with paintwork, even if I spent a long time on it. Now for the third and final section of this video, let's take a look at using these tools in a more creative application. So this is the footage that I have for shot 3, and I'm going to be using this as the basis to add some matte painting elements into. Specifically, I'm going to add some snow onto the floor, I'm going to turn the water to ice, and try and add some icicles coming off of the fountain up here. So it's the same process as previously. I'm going to pick a frame to output to Griptape, probably something in the middle. This footage is 4K, and I'm going to output it at 4K as well, and then also generate the elements in Griptape in 4K. That way I can punch in by about 10 or 20% into my 4K footage, which means the matte painting elements that we create will fill the entire shot, even though the camera moves a little bit. So let's pick one vaguely in the middle. I'll go for about here. Give it the same name as my plate again, .jpeg, output rec 709, render one frame. and then let's hop into Griptape. So same thing as before, I'm going to go into my Shot 3 folder this time, grab my plate, drag it into Griptape. For this version I'm going to get a bit more advanced and use a few different nodes as opposed to just straight into Nano Banana. And I'm also going to do this in a couple of stages. So first of all, I'd quite like to get rid of the railings in this shot. I just think they're a little bit of an eyesore, so I'm going to use Nano Banana to remove those as a first stage. And then for the second stage we'll look at adding the snow and the icicles. So first of all, once again, over on the left hand side, Nano Banana image generation node. Image input goes into here. I'm going to set my output resolution to 4K, and my prompt is going to be remove the metal railing. Don't change anything else. I'm going to call this GRP shot 3 clean plate underscore version 1.jpg, and that's everything. So let's run this workflow. And as we can see, that's now finished. It's replaced the railings with a hedge, which I actually didn't want, and it's got rid of the benches. So I'm going to run this again, but change the prompt a tiny bit. Remove the metal railings, but keep the grass and benches behind them. Don't change anything else. Let's run that again. Okay, let's have a look. And that's much better. So now we have this as our base image, we can start to work on a second stage, building on top of this. To do that, I'm going to add a second Nano Banana node. And I'm going to plug the image from here into this image. Let's call this GRP shot 3 underscore matte painting underscore version 1.jpg. For the prompt, I'm going to say add snow onto the floor and fountain. Don't change anything else. You can get very specific with your prompts in terms of directing where you want things to go, but ultimately Nano Banana is always going to be trying to work out what you mean just from your text prompt. So one thing we can do to help this a bit is give it some other input images, or specifically in this case I'm going to draw some masks to tell it where to change the image. To do that I can come down to the tools on the left hand side and add a paint mask, and I'm going to put it up here. Actually, let's do this. Then I'm going to take my input plate and plug this into the paint mask, and then once it shows up here, if I go into the paint mask node and click on this edit paint mask button, it brings up an interface that lets you draw over the image. So very simply, I'm just going to draw a bit of a mask onto the water, and I'm going to use this to say change this to ice. Something like that will do. And then I'm going to click invert mask so that we change it to be just selecting the water, and press apply. And then I can take the output image from the mask and plug it into the second input here on the second Nano Banana node. Then in my prompt, I'm going to extend it slightly, and I'm going to say change the water to ice inside of the white area of the mask from input images 2, which is this input here, as you can see. Then I'm going to add another paint mask underneath this, and again I'm just going to connect it up to my input image. And for this one I'm going to direct it to add some icicles onto the top of the fountain. So again, same process as before, I'm just going to colour in the area that I want to be affected, and this will make sure that Nano Banana is not trying to add icicles anywhere else. I'm going to invert the mask again and press apply, and you can see we now have this black and white mask. I can grab the output image from here, plug it into the third input on the second Nano Banana node, and again I'm just going to tweak my prompt a little bit to say add some icicles hanging from the fountain inside of the white area of the mask from input images 3. Okay, now we're pretty much ready to set this off. I'm going to change my image size to 4K again on the second Nano Banana node. And also this time I'm going to resize my output to be exactly the same as my input image. Before I was doing that in Nuke, but you can also do that within Griptape very easily. I'm going to do this using the resize image node, drag it into my viewer here, and then take the output of the Nano Banana node and into the resize image. There's a few different modes of resizing. It's currently on percentage. I'm actually going to change it to width and height so that I can specify exactly what I want it to be. My target width is going to be 3840 and my target height is going to be 2160, which is the input resolution of my plate over here, as you can see. You can also change the resizing filter. Lanczos tends to be the best for preserving sharpness, but it can sometimes introduce some sharpening artifacts, and particularly because I'm working on a JPEG, which is fairly compressed. I'm going to change this to be bilinear. Output format, I'm going to change it to be JPEG, just like everything else I've been doing. Quality, might as well set to 100% for the best output. And then the name is going to be GRP shot 3 underscore matte painting underscore version 1, and then I'll say underscore 4K, just so it doesn't overwrite the previous one, and then .jpeg on the end. Okay, we could kick off the whole workflow again, but seeing as I've already generated this node here, I can go in and instead start the process from the second Nano Banana node by clicking this button in the middle here. So let's do this and see how it goes. It's going to start by resolving the paint mask nodes that we've done first, and then once they're done, the Nano Banana node will kick off. Okay, it's finished. Let's take a look at the image. So this is what it's generated. Really impressive. It's put a load of snow on the background bushes, which is super cool. Snow on the benches, snow on the floor. It's put the ice in the water, as I asked. We've got icicles hanging off the fountain in the area that I specified. It's done a really good job. This looks great. This image is still 5.5K, so lastly, I'm just going to run the Griptape node to resize the image. And now, as you can see, it's 3840 by 2160 again. So this is the final result from Nuke. We've got lots of parallax going on, even though we only generated a 2D image. I'll break down the comp a little bit. I'm not going to show the whole process because, again, this isn't a compositing video. But essentially the way this works is I've split up the generated Nano Banana image into lots of different parts, mainly rotoing out separate parts and treating it like an actual matte painting. So I've split up different elements, and then I can track them in and project them at different distances from the camera on 3D geometry. So starting from the background and working forward, the first thing I added was the bush in the background. For pretty much all of these elements, I did a little bit of paint work to extend what came out from Nano Banana. The reason for that is that on a still, it works great, but if I don't do the paint work and we go to another frame later on, you can see that because of the parallax with the background, we start to get the foreground statue coming back through in my projection, which obviously I don't want. So based on what part I'm reprojecting at the time, I did some paint work to extend it, so I got rid of the benches from this and painted out a little bit of the statue, and then I'm just masking them out and pre-molting them. In this case, I'm also using a fractal blur on the edges of the mask to break up the edge of the mask a little bit, and then that gets projected on some geometry, in this case just a card in the back. Then still going from the back and working our way forward, I rotate this pole back on top. Then the foreground floor elements go in, so that's all of the snow on the floor. And again for this one, I did a load of paint work to basically in-paint into the foreground elements, so that when I project the floor, I'm not going to have any of the fountain skewed in the projection. And the same thing for the benches as well, as I'll do them all separately. So that's the foreground snow. Then the benches go back on top. Initially I was going to rotate the original benches, and then I remembered they're actually behind the railings that Nano Banana removed. So I just used the generated ones and projected those instead. Then I rotate the fountain back on top. This is just restoring it so that we're not losing any of the edges where I in-painted the snow. I just did a very simple 2-point track on the fountain and stabilized it, and then drew a few masks. Then we've got the snow and the ice on the fountain, and the icicles up here. In this case I used 2 bits of geometry. So I'm using a cylinder that I just modified, and then just a card for the fountain projection. Put this on a cylinder so that it has a bit of a curve, which gives it a little bit of parallax. And then I also put some reflections over the top of the ice, just by taking the original plate, flipping it upside down, blurring it a little bit. And this helps have some moving reflections in the ice, because obviously the DMP element is just a still, so it doesn't move, so it doesn't really work correctly with the reflections. So this is faking a little bit of interaction with the background. Then I put the fountain back on top, again just restoring any of the original stuff from the plate that needs to go back over. And then lastly, the snow at the bottom of the fountain here. Again, this is tracked in separately, and I just used an edit geo node and pulled the vertices around on this card a bit to fake the shape of that fountain front. So the reason for cutting these all out individually and layering them up like that is because they're all at different points in 3D space and distances from the camera, so they all need their own amount of parallax, and also a lot of them needed treating individually. For example, all the in-painting I had to do to make sure that there was nothing projected that I didn't want. So once again, the final result looks like this. You can obviously take this process as far as you'd like. If I was finishing this shot properly, I would have obviously done some stuff on the background as well, like putting some snow on the trees, maybe on the windowsills and the roofs of the buildings. But this was just to demonstrate the concepts. The last thing I want to cover before the end of the video is increasing the dynamic range of 8-bit images. There's no perfect workflow for this currently, but recently I saw a post on LinkedIn from someone that had made some copycat training data in Nuke that was trained to do exactly this. So I'm going to bring in the Nuke script that download comes with. Just looks like this. It's a small string of nodes, and plug this into my generated image. Then if I go into the inference node and bring in the copycat data, which is in here, because I'm in a different version of ACES, it's also going to error, so I'll just set the color spaces to be correct. And if I look at it now, you should see that the image is getting brighter in some areas. If I look at the original and sample some of the values of the snow, you can see it never goes above 1, so essentially it's clamped. Whereas what this copycat data is doing is giving it some values above 1, which increases the dynamic range. This is really beneficial for color grading and also compositing, as it means you can pull the image around a bit more before it starts to break. Currently, if I started to try and do much with this matte painting, if I increase the exposure or decrease it, you can see there's not really any range at all to work with here. It does a little bit of nice stuff to the highlights on the snow, but this probably isn't the best example. So let's take a quick look at a more extreme version. I've got a sunset JPEG here. Again, this is an 8-bit image, and if I plug this into the copycat setup, you can see how much more range we get out of the sun before it's completely clamped, and in this one it looks a lot more photorealistic and natural. If I turn down the exposure in my viewport, it behaves a lot more like a higher dynamic range image. So although it's not a foolproof workflow, running your generated images through a setup like this can help to get a bit more out of them. I hope this video was a useful insight into the basics of using Griptape inside of a compositing workflow. Thanks very much for watching.